I need to put this issue in its proper context. Firstly, and I need to stress this, help, including payment moratoriums, have never stopped for those in need. So I want to clear the air by firmly dispelling this misconception that without a blanket moratorium, borrowers in difficulty will not get help. This is simply not true. Bank Negara Malaysia has worked with banks to ensure a smooth transition from the blanket moratorium. Firstly, the industry came together and agreed to extend the moratorium on loan repayments for borrowers who had become unemployed. And for those who had suffered a reduction in income, be it their own income or that of the household, at the household level, banks allow borrowers to reduce their installments. And for borrowers who are industries that have been more significantly affected, such as tourism, some banks have also offered to extend the moratorium by 6 months, with a possibility of it being further extended if conditions do not improve, say if our international borders do not reopen. Second, as announced at last week's budget, the extension of moratorium and reduction in installments have been further extended to all B40 households and micro businesses with loan amounts up to 150,000 ringgit. Borrowers in these categories do not need to provide that they have lost their jobs or suffered a loss in household income. Third, every bank roll out a range of additional assistance packages of their own that can be tailored to the specific circumstances faced by borrowers. This is available to all individuals and businesses who need help. Fourth, banks have significantly simplified the process to request for repayment moratorium or other forms of assistance in terms of channels for borrowers to apply and in terms of documentation that the borrowers would have to submit. In many cases, such as the B40 households, documentation from borrowers is not needed for certain assistance packages, as the banks will be leveraging on the existing database managed by LHDN and the Ministry of Finance. Similarly, M40 borrowers who want to reduce their installments only need to make a self-declaration when applying. So where required, documents requested from borrowers help banks to properly advise borrowers on the options they can consider to manage their debt. Fifth, I hope it's fifth or not sixth. Multiple avenues have been established for borrowers that still may have problems with their banks, such as difficulty reaching their banks, slow responses, requests for assistance that were not approved to get help. And this include through AKPK, Bank Negara's link, and SME associations. Like banks, we have increased the capacity at AKPK and BNM Link to advise and help borrowers. We know that for an exercise of this mammoth scale, there are bound to have there are still bound to be some who may encounter problems with their banks. Bank Negara closely monitors complaints by borrowers and response times by banks, and we follow up on all of them. We have not seen large numbers of complaints, and they are clearly in the minority, representing only 0.1% of total RA applications. If there are more borrowers that have problems, they should come forward and we will help them. BNM Link can also help arrange for banks to contact borrowers at their preferred times. We want to help all affected borrowers. What is important to take away here is those who need an extension of the moratorium or to reduce their installment can and will almost certainly get it. Over 650,000, if I'm not mistaken, have applied, And with a 98% approval rate, this indicates that virtually everyone who applies gets it, and borrowers need not feel worried about approaching their banks or picking up the phone when your bank calls you. Second, a blanket moratorium will not be in the best interest of the economy. While it puts money in people's pockets in the short term, it creates a lot of economic distortions and has a negative economic impact. Let me explain. One, it will constrain new lending to households and businesses as bank buffers are depleted and banks become more risk averse. Two, it will increase overall debt levels. Those who can afford to pay should pay down their debt. This will constrain growth and hurt the economy down the road as more borrowers struggle under the weight of higher debt. A debt-driven growth is simply not sustainable. Already, household debt to GDP now stands at around 90%. This is an all-time high for Malaysia. Three, I hope I've been using all these numbers correctly. It undermines, and this is something that a lot of people fail to recognize. A blanket extension of the moratorium undermines the interest of millions of depositors that count on banks to keep their money safe, and also the interest of millions of Malaysians that are shareholders of banks through their savings with funds like ASB, in their EPF retirement savings, tabung haji, and pensions in co-op. Public confidence and trust in the banking system and banking sector stability is something that we must preserve and not take for granted. And not just by the impact of our actions today, but how they will shape public trust and confidence in the banking system in the future. So whatever we do, we must remember that banks safeguard the hard-earned savings of all Malaysians.